So it's been a few days now, but I'm gonna get back to working on the ITB setup. Got a new garage shirt from the collector car auction in town, which is where we've been doing our cars and coffee events. And so who knows, someday maybe I'll fill the other spot with a muscle car from the auction show. After talking to Rama about the ITBs and kind of my throttle body setup that I have here, I actually have another bracket that's gonna be shorter, so it'll move the cable in a little bit, so we'll be able to relieve a little bit of tension there. And then he had mentioned that this little knob at the end I can cut off. He is sending me another one to replace this one, but I can cut off this end and that'll allow the full range of motion. Adjust these two things. And then the only other thing, I do believe he had mentioned that I have this J-hook in the wrong spot for adjusting the other ITBs. So I'll go ahead, I might have to pull them off to kind of fit that on there. But we'll get that fixed, the bracket over, trim up this piece to be able to have it open up all the way. So I cut off that little nub on the end of it and just hit it with some gray primer. I know it doesn't look good and it kind of smears out, but a replacement part is coming. I just don't know how long it'll take, and I want to be able to get everything up and running. And then I should, once the new part comes in, I should easily be able to just change it out. So I'm finally making some progress getting the ITBs, the actual, I guess, the flapper doors lined up properly. I had this J piece on the main pair sitting in this loop that then has like a stopper screw on the back, thinking it needed to go in the loop. But what it actually needed to do, I think at this point, was I had to kind of like press the J piece on the back side of the loop and in between that and the stopper screw. So now, because I took this off, I have to get it bolted back on. But on the Rev Limited forum, one of the users, Digger, had mentioned using a straight edge to line everything up. I don't know if you can see in there, but there is a little bit of lip when it transfers from the actual throttle body to the runner. So I don't get it confused, we'll just leave it slightly open. And then as I tighten down the screws, I'll have my finger in there just making sure that we don't have that bad lip showing. I now have all three pairs attached and properly on there. It confused me at first. You see the screws, you see the screws, you see the back of the screws. So I took it apart thinking it needed to go around the other way, but in the instructions it does say that that one's reversed so that the throttle position sensor can be more easily accessible, although even how it is not very accessible. It's tucked back there. I'll need to adjust everything once the car's running with the tool to kind of make sure that everything does pull the same amount of airflow, but just for now, everything does open and close together, and it looks so good. Another day in the garage. I've kind of lost track of where I was with everything on the ITBs. I had a few busy days with work, so it's been about a week since I've been in here. What I really need to do is start hooking up all the coolant lines again, and probably while the actual runners were out, I should have started putting in kind of where the vacuum lines are going to go, I think. So hopefully I can still get those inserted in the bottom without having to take anything out. Can't say I've made too much progress, but I have all of the fittings in this block, like a distribution block for the vacuum. And then I was able to get all of the fittings in the bottom of the runners without having to take them back out. It was a little tricky, especially the one in the back, but with a little bit of wiggling and getting the right angle, everything went in fine. So I didn't put any thread tape on these, which I think I might regret later on, but that's just one thing to remember. If I do have a vacuum sealing problem later on, that I'll probably want to actually go back and put that thread tape on. There's not really a good place to put this. It looks like there's a couple screws in it that might be used for some type of mounting, but it's not like any mounting kit came with this. And there definitely isn't a bracket. Like, I lose the bracket that this wire was on and these two wires were on. They were kind of up in the front. But what I want to do is kind of just position this piece as centered as I can, and then I have one vacuum hose already on, and basically I'll try to mock it up so that this sits here. I'm hoping with everything kind of hooked up, it can create enough tension and support that it can just kind of dangle there. What I want to try to do is have that there and then measure out this vacuum hose to all of the fittings. And then once I have the furthest out on either side kind of measured, I want to make sure that all of the lines are the same length. It doesn't necessarily say that they need to be the same length, but I just think for pulling the same amount of vacuum that it would be better to try to get everything the same length. So it should be fairly easy. I think we'll measure out, like I said, from the ones on the edge, which should be the longest, and then the other ones can probably curl in and fit as necessary. And just like that, I have 6 equal length lines on. I think it actually might just end up being a little too long. So maybe we'll try to fit it on, and then if I need to, shorten up the little ones just to scoot, everything closer, and then we could probably trim down as necessary. I have my distribution block in there, and everything's hooked up with the equal length hosing. I don't really like how the orientation just kind of forces it to point up like that. I'd like it to sit, more in this space. But maybe once I get everything else, it'll line up better. The real small fitting goes to the fuel pressure regulator, so I would imagine it's probably off of this side of it. The big one should connect to the idle control valve somehow, and this medium-sized one, I think, comes down to the charcoal canister. This is what I have for the idle control valve. I guess 1/2 should hook up to the plenum, and 1/2 to a hose that gets there, but I guess I'll have to get something to step down that size, or maybe I need to connect these 2 sizes, and then this I need a hose to connect to the plenum. There is an arrow on it, so I just have to think about which way that goes. There is this patch fitting for the plenum side, either in the plenum, or they say you can put it in the backing plate. I think I'd be a little bit more comfortable cutting into the backing plate than actually cutting into the carbon fiber and trying to put the patch in there. But either way, I'll need a hose to connect these 2 things, and however else I'm going to connect the idle control valve to my distribution block. The other thing that I still need to figure out, like I said, is the charcoal canister. Not entirely sure what this plug is even called, but this is what on a stock E30 goes into that charcoal canister. I think it's actually oriented like this, and this top side comes to the bottom of the throttle body of the stock setup. So I would imagine I'll keep this valve in here somehow, and then I think this hose is too big for that fitting, so just get a slightly smaller hose. And the last hose I need to figure out is the one for the brake booster. This is that valve that goes into the brake booster, and then basically I'll just have to get another hose to connect to this side of it, and it'll connect to that fitting right in there. Okay, I'm back in the garage with the E30. It's probably been at least a month since I've worked on it. It's still not done yet, but I think I'm one step closer. I've moved this wire, the bundle of the engine harness wires, behind the throttle bodies, so that helps kind of with the spacing of it, and that gives me more room to get the throttle position sensor plugged in. Reran some of the wires just to kind of believe it, this is cleaned up. Still no coolant in it, but I did get a bridge, a little connector piece to loop out the 2 coolant lines that used to go to the stock throttle body. Instead of capping them, I just put kind of a connector in there. I've grown a little impatient, so I'm going to try to give it a first start. I put the battery back in. I'll have to reprime the gas system just because I depressurized that and had the fuse pulled out. And even in the month that I've been waiting, I actually lost my key, so I had to get a new one, brand new, just cut from BMW. There you have it. There's the first start. I made the video in between all of the work here to put in the catch can. You can see it's here. I think the hose is a little intrusive on how it is. But at this point, it's final checks just to make sure I have all of the coolant lines hooked up. I want to go through, finish up the vacuum lines that I need to the brake booster and the ICV. And at that point, I think I'll get the runners on or the trumpets on and see if I can start it and see if I can get some of the syncing happening with the different throttle bodies. So changing around the system for the brake booster, there was an inline check valve, but it's no longer available to buy. So what I did was grab this universal one right here. It's going to go straight into the brake booster, acts as the elbow and the check valve all in one. So that'll solve part of our vacuum problems. I already put a new grommet into the brake booster. Just got the hose connected for the brake booster. Actually fits in there nice. Won't run it too long because there's no coolant in it. The idle sounds much higher than what it should be. Because I switched over the harness and I never wired back in the tach, I don't really know where that's at. So I think that's going to really be my next point of emphasis to fix, just so I can see where the tach's at. I had to give it gas to get it started. So potentially that's something with the tune. We'll look into that a little bit further. Look at me, the electrician. It's now with the tach hopefully hooked up. I'm going to give it another start just to see where it might be idling. That's right at 2,000 RPMs. I don't think these are open. I don't think it's like pulling in extra air here, but maybe once I sync it, it'll lower, even out. I don't know. So I put on the spacers just to get one step further. At this point, I would need to synchronize them. So I'm not really sure, but I think you just shove that in there and then look at the reading, and then I can adjust all of the throttle positions off of that. And I would start with the middle too, because that's what the linkage is on, and then work on the outer pairs, one pair at a time basically. Definitely had a lot of trouble getting the throttle cable into the right location. I put on the new piece that Rama from RHD sent me. Basically, you know, I shaved off the little bit, the mislabeled part that I was sent. But I really just don't like how close the end of the cable sits to the fuel rail. I think it catches on it sometimes, so we really have that tucked under there. And then at full throttle, I feel like it hits down in this section. So I'm not entirely sure how to remedy that right now. Looks like the throttles are closed, but I think I can still do a little bit of adjustment here just to get them, you know, more tight at this point, and maybe when the car's running, it vacuum closes them a little bit more than what they're at. And because I'll have the car running for, you know, a few minutes at a time, to try to synchronize everything, I'm going to add the coolant in now. Just started to pour some in. I'll have to turn the car on and bleed the system. With this radiator, it's such a pain because not only do you have the stock bleeder screw on the thermostat housing, there's also a radiator bleed screw here. So it takes a bit of finagling to get the system bled here, but I'll go ahead and get that, get all the coolant in it, and start to try to synchronize some of these throttle bodies. Got a little bit of a vacuum leak, I think, out of the charcoal canister hose. The idle is creeping up a little bit, so I push that in and it levels off.